Today marks 9 years since Limpopo learner Michael Komape drowned in a pit toilet at school in 2014. A tragic death that should never have happened so far into South Africa's democracy. Despite government's promises of eradicating these shameful structures, latrines are still prevalent in rural areas. To help us unpack the topic, I'm joined in studio by the Secretary General of Equal Education, Noncedo Madubedube. We also welcome Chairperson or Spokesperson for the Department of Basic Education, Elijah Mhlanga. And on Zoom, we're joined by South African Human Rights Commissioner Advocate Andre Gaum, as well as Member of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, Ronnie Moroatshehla. Tonight we ask, has the Department of Basic Education failed to eradicate pit toilets? But first, let's watch this insert produced by Skangiwe Mtiane.
The 3rd of October 2023 would have been Michael Komape's 15th birthday had he not tragically drowned in a pit toilet on the 20th of January in 2014. The 5-year-old is one of many school children who have fallen to their deaths in pit toilets over the years. Records from Water and Sanitation Africa show that 4 children have tragically died in pit toilets in South Africa since 2014. The Department of Basic Education promised to replace all pit toilets in schools nationwide by March 31, 2023. However, that has not happened. Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga said there are still 3,398 schools using pit latrines, and the deadline to eradicate them has been shifted to 2025.
Government must build safe toilets at all schools. We cannot have more children die in the same way that mine did.
Earlier this year, the Centre for Child Law and Section 27 condemned the devastatingly low pace of the Department of Basic Education in eradicating pit latrines in public schools. Despite the department reducing schools using pit toilets in Limpopo from 363 in 2021 to 210 schools, the number is still alarming.
There are nearly 4,000 schools across the country that only have pit latrines or other inappropriate sanitation facilities. These are the schools that serve the children of the poor in our country. It was in such a school, Madubedube Primary School in Limpopo, where 5-year-old Michael Komape drowned in a pit toilet in 2014. It was also in such a school, Luna Junior Primary School in the Eastern Cape, where Mhlanga lost her life in March this year. And it was this that really touched the sensitive nerve or chord of our nation, and where we felt that we needed to do something immediately and urgently.
As government continues to miss its own targets to improve learning facilities, Amnesty International's research in Gauteng and the Eastern Cape found numerous examples of schools with poor infrastructure and lacking basic facilities. 1 in 8 Gauteng school buildings contained asbestos, exposing hundreds of thousands of pupils and about 10,000 teachers to serious health risks. If these asbestos structures become dilapidated, fibers are released into the air. If they are inhaled, they can cause deadly respiratory diseases, according to the National Institute for Occupational Health.
We have done a presentation to the Human Rights Commission regarding the asbestos buildings, which are, and some of the buildings which are also very dilapidated, which have health risk for the learners, teachers, and the school community at large. So what happened is that the department promises to demolish the asbestos buildings. It was for the past 5 years already.
Budget cuts and alleged corruption within the department have affected scholar transportation and the food nutrition program. This has had dire consequences for pupils in far-flung areas and those coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. As the department grapples to sort out these issues and others of pupil safety and lack of adequate infrastructure in schools with no glimmer of hope in sight, it seems that pupils will continue to bear the brunt. Tonight we ask, has the Department of Basic Education failed in its duty of providing a safe and dignified learning experience for all learners in South Africa? For Unfiltered, I'm Skangiwe Mtiane.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're asking tonight, does government's failure to meet its deadlines for pit latrines mean that we may never actually see this coming to fruition? Ms. Madubedube, can I start with you? Deadlines for 2023, now it's been moved to 2025. What is behind the failure to meet the deadlines of eradicating pit latrines in our schools as we commemorate this anniversary?
Look, inside civil society, we've got three guesses. And civil society in the education sector particularly is very involved in the nuts and bolts of the work of the Department of Basic Education. So we meet with the officials often. There are stakeholder engagements. We support and meet often with the research units and the respective units that deal with things like infrastructure, for example, LTSMs, for different reasons. So when I say guesses, it's sort of informed guesses. The first is that we do think the Department of Basic Education at a national and at a provincial level is struggling with data, accurate data to truly describe and map out where are the priority issues in schools that need urgent attention around the eradication of plain pit latrines in particular. And so if you're going to plan around data that you don't have or isn't accurate, you're going to be planning into the dark. And so the work of civil society has been for a long time, from the promulgation of this law, been chasing after, quite proactively, the departments of basic education at a national and provincial level and reminding them that that isn't where your intervention should be, and we have to think equitably about resources to eradicate these really undignified conditions in these schools. And the second is associated to the data issue and the planning issue. It's around allocations of appropriate budgets to address these issues inside of these schooling environments. And the third, we really think, is political will. We think for a long time, since the promulgation of the norms and standards of basic school infrastructure, Department of Basic Education haven't prioritized the eradication and the dealing of school infrastructure in particular.
Mr. Mhlanga, what do you say to the question, especially of political will, that actually there just isn't the will at the moment to finally eradicate this question of pit latrines in South African schools?
Well, I don't agree. There's political will. The minister will never speak in public without mentioning school infrastructure as a challenge that we need to attend to as a department, as a sector, and as a country. You will not make something a priority if you are not willing to deal with it. So that means that her heart is in the right place insofar as that is concerned. But
we need more than that, don't we? Hearts have been in the right place for a while, but there have been deadlines. One was last year or this year, and it's been perennially moved. I appreciate that progress has been made, and we're talking about 700 and not 9,600 like we were in 2006, but you did promise, and still nothing has happened on this question, not other wider infrastructure questions.
I was about to tell you what you're doing, and then you interrupted me.
Well, I was just worried about the hearts being in the right place, and obviously we South Africans want more than hearts being in the right place.
Don't worry, listen. It's better if you listen than worry.
Well, I'm going to ask questions because you're a public representative, and this is a crucial question for South Africans. And people dying in pit latrines is not something to...
Can you allow me to answer you now?
If your answer is adequate, I may ask a follow-up question. And that's how...
We have an hour to do that, so please give me space to speak.
Well, let's talk about more than hearts in right places.
Can I speak now? So what the minister has done is to coordinate provinces to do the work that is supposed to do. She has introduced accountability tools. One of them is having each province to account to her every Friday in terms of the work that they are doing. But over and above that, she has sent the Director General to all the projects that are taking place across the country, and he is there. If you check on the platforms of the department, we are sharing on a daily basis images of sanitation structures that are being built on a day-to-day basis. Even at this time, he would still be monitoring the work that is happening there.
Okay.
Because he wants to make sure that the contractors that have been given the work do the work even in the evenings, because we are prioritizing the eradication of inappropriate sanitation facilities.
Well, let me allow others to also intervene in the conversation. Advocate Gaum, what's your response to the question as to why we are still in this situation, having not actually eradicated pit latrines, at least by the 2023 deadline?
Yes, I think that the remarks about the inaccuracy of data is a very important one, as well as adequate budgets. We have seen the Accelerated Schools Infrastructure Delivery Initiative and the Sanitation Appropriate for Education programs from the National Department of Basic Education, because the provinces actually were simply not able to deliver as far as basic sanitation is concerned. And therefore, whilst the provinces are actually the agents of delivery in terms of education, also in our constitution, the minister had to intervene. But for me, one of the greatest problems is that I'm not sure if we really know where, and if the National Department really knows where exactly the problems are. And I'm saying that because in 2021, the Commission requested very specific information from all the provincial governments regarding the existence and number of pit latrines. And we asked these information per school and in accordance with the provisions of the norms and standards for school infrastructure. So we would, for example, ask, what is the type of sanitation infrastructure in each and every school? Is it waterborne sanitation, small bore sewer reticulation, septic or conservancy tanks, ventilated improved pit latrines, composting toilets, pit latrines, or none? And we received certain information. It took us very long to actually get this information from the provinces, which maybe brings us to another point, and that is openness and transparency with the public in respect of specific schools and what the situation is there. I think that is lacking, and I think it would be much better if there is more transparency. And we asked these questions in 20 May again. And the information we're getting back from the provinces are very much in conflict with, what the reality seems to be. It is inaccurate. Some provinces don't even provide the Human Rights Commission with answers. They seem not to know that they are obliged to do so in terms of the Constitution. So yes, I think the data matter is very important.
Right.
Adequate budgets, we can get to that later.
Indeed, and let's leave it at that for now. We will go deeper into that. Mr. Moroatshehla, may I ask you, in terms of parliamentary oversight, especially on this specific question of pit latrines, do you think enough has been done in terms of accountability over this question, and what mechanisms within the Portfolio Committee have you seen to exercise oversight over the failure to meet the 2023 deadline? I believe you're on mute, Mr. Moroatshehla.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Let me start right away by greeting yourself, the panel in the studio, and all the viewers and listeners at home. For a start, let me indicate that it is true that there are challenges that are confronting our delivery of education in South Africa. But however, I'm going to plead with your panel and everybody that we avoid at all costs to have what I normally call a black spot analysis. The black spot analysis is whereby you look on the white paper and only concentrate on the black spot which paint all the efforts being done black and bleak. However, responding to your question, the question with regard to the pit toilets, let me indicate that from time to time as a portfolio committee, we have moved along or around a number of provinces. But what I can tell you today, seated here, is that indeed there is a very great improvement. I think facts should be able to influence this interview than any other thing. Hence, I talk about the black spot analysis. In 2006, there were more than 9,600 pit toilets in South Africa.
I did mention that, Mr. Moroatshehla.
Yes. In 2018, this number was reduced to 3,898. And as I'm talking to you, it is less, 2,728. So which means the numbers we are talking about, which number failed to beat the target of 2022-2023, it's 607 pit latrines, which are still to be eradicated. Hence, this is the number you're talking about, that they have been shifted to 2023-2024, the next year, academic year. So I think, judging from the way in which the department tried itself, I'm not here to defend DBE. I'm not an employee of DBE, but I want the public to know the facts, that a lot has been done. We are talking now about 667.
So are you talking about 667 pit latrines or 667 schools? Because if we're going to talk about the facts are 667 schools, not pit latrines. It was 9,600
we are talking
schools,
about this.
And the current shortfall is about the number of schools, not the number of pit latrines.
No. You see, when we talk, I think what we are talking about here, we are talking about those schools which are still having pit latrines.
Yes,
we are not going to count the number of pit latrines in each and every school.
But that's what you did, I'm afraid. So I was saying it's important that we state the facts accurately, which is 667 schools, not pit latrines, which is what you earlier said.
Yes, I agree with you. So I've been talking about schools here. I never talked about the pit latrines, because I can't go and count individual pit latrines in each and every school.
Maybe it was an omission on your part.
Let's judge here and say a lot has been done, and we must agree to that point.
No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point, sir. Ms. Madubedube, how do you respond to the argument that a lot has been done and a lot of progress has been made from 9,600 to 700 or just under 700 schools?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping that the tempo of the conversation can be a little bit more, I don't know, I'm going to say calm, maybe soberer. The intention isn't to chastise, because we all work in the same sector. But I think two things. One is that I am concerned because a member of the portfolio committee is coming to bat. I mean, there was a subscript that said ANC in the corner there, so that does make me nervous. Dr. Ronnie isn't a member, works at DBE. It makes me wonder about his allegiances in the conversation. Because what we're doing here is not trying to chastise progress made, but really address the question around there's a constitutional right for dignity and safety for learners inside schools. And for the longest time between the promulgation of this law, the norms and standards of school infrastructure, we've struggled to put this question as a priority for the Department of Basic Education. And that's a fact. Okay, so while progress has been made, and we're always acknowledging and welcoming that progress made, we are concerned about the fact that there are still priority schools that have, and now we're not talking about plain pit latrines inside school. We're talking about schools where this is the only form of sanitation available. And that, to us, is undignified, but also dangerous.
Right, let's leave it there and let's go to a break. The question of pit latrines in South African schools has been a perennial one on our public school and education landscape. Today we're asking why we have not eradicated pit latrines, but also drawing a wider focus on questions of school infrastructure. When we come back, we're going to look at some other areas of progress outside this narrow question of pit latrines, which may complicate the picture further. Don't go anywhere after the break, and remember to tweet on social media using Unfiltered SABC. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Unfiltered. Why has South Africa failed to eradicate pit latrines in 2023? That's the question we're posing, but also delving wider into questions of the infrastructure of South Africa's basic education landscape. Mr. Mhlanga, let me come to you. We have been talking in this debate about whether adequate progress has been made, and I think we do have to accept that in some ways major progress has been made, but on the other hand, we haven't eradicated pit latrines. Is there anything that you'd like to say and intervene on the debate thus far in terms of this question of pit latrines?
Absolutely. I suspect that Moroatshehla has an old report which said that we were left with 667 schools. As of today, it's 496 schools. So between when we tabled that report to the portfolio committee and today, there's been some progress.
Great. So that's between March and now?
Yes.
Excellent.
So we are moving towards eradicating all the 496 by the end of March 2024.
And do you think that the pace is at such a speed that the new deadline of 2025 is feasible and reachable by the department?
Absolutely, it is, as indicated already in just the number of schools that would have been provided with appropriate sanitation between March and today. We believe that the 496 that are at various stages of implementation should be able to receive their appropriate sanitation facilities by end of the current financial year. So we are confident that we're going to meet the deadline. Also because of the accountability tools that I mentioned earlier that the minister has put in place. So every 4 days, someone must account. So that should certainly put pressure on those people that are focused on delivering on this work, but also the contracting people that are doing the work. They know that they need to finish and move off-site so that the children and the teachers can begin to use this facility. So we are working towards creating a conducive environment for our teachers and staff, for them to be able to use them without any fear of anyone falling into these structures.
Advocate Gaum, could I come to you and just ask whether you think that we could reach the 2025 new deadline now, and also give us an update. I know that the Human Rights Commission announced an intention to litigate against the department in December 2021, I think. Where are we in terms of that process, and is that something you are still going to be pursuing?
Yes, well, we might be. The point is that we asked certain very pertinent questions, as I mentioned, to the provinces in 2021. We've done that now again, and we got mixed reactions. Some of the provinces, including Northwest and KwaZulu-Natal, did not even respond. Mhlanga indicated that they still have 133 pit latrines schools, or schools using pit latrines. Limpopo reported over 305 schools. And the Eastern Cape, using data from 2018, reported that 3,157 schools require sanitation intervention, and that 1,598 schools use pit latrines based on that data. Now, that's some time ago. Why they used that data to answer our question that was in relation to the position this year, I don't know. So yes, I am not sure. I don't want to say I don't believe that there are only 496 schools left with pit latrines. I really do hope that that is indeed the situation. And I do welcome the initiatives of the minister, the national minister in particular, including these programs that she has put in place, as well as that accountability mechanism that has been raised just now. But I wonder why the National Minister of Basic Education wouldn't, for example, publish a monthly report listing every school in the country and then indicating what the position is at that school in terms of the norms and standards, so that the whole nation can see what progress is being made and that we can go and monitor the situation as well. So yes, it is difficult for me, given the information that we have received, with 2 provinces not responding, to know whether that is indeed the situation. And I think that if there's more, together with the accountability mechanisms she's put in place, to also be more open and transparent with the nation on a monthly basis, to report and to mention the name of the school and the situation pertaining to sanitation at the school, that would help all of us. It would even help the public and assist her to monitor whether that is indeed the situation and whether the information provided to her is indeed correct.
Right. Mr. Moroatshehla, outside of the narrow question of pit latrines, which seem to be a particular difficulty, I think it is also fair to say that in terms of infrastructure, there are some important gains that have been made. I see here, for example, in terms of buildings and the adequacy of buildings, impressive gains reported to the portfolio committee in terms of access to water, access to electricity. So we, as you earlier said, can't have this debate outside the context of at least those impressive gains that have been at least reported. The extent to which they're accurate, I may ask some of our other panelists, but just to reflect on that wider picture of infrastructure and your assessment of where we are right now.
Thank you once more for the opportunity. You see, we as the portfolio committee have moved throughout the whole country in all of the 9 provinces. You are right when you say, indeed, there are still some outstanding challenges with regard to infrastructure. But maybe let me go right away to, because when you talk about the pit latrines, you can't talk about the pit latrines without talking about water provision. There is a vast improvement. Hence, I wanted the panel to avoid at all cost analyzing this whole thing from what you call the black spot analysis, looking for the wrongs,
sure,
even where there is a lot of right. In 2006, in this country, or the schools in this country, were without water were up to 8,823. And maybe without telling you going into the breakdown for the sake of time, let me tell you that as I'm talking to you now, and based on the last report, of course, I must say to Dade Elijah Mhlanga that the information that I will share with you, it will be the information as per the last meeting. Mm-hmm. And what has been done between our last meeting and now is what I will not be able to report to. But I think Dade Mhlanga is better placed to say what happened there. As I'm talking to, there are only 14 water projects in our ditch to address all those schools which were without the provision of water. So you will realize that a lot has been done. And I say, in as much as we will condemn that there is still a backlog, let us also say this department has done more than enough to address the apartheid redress. And we need people who will be able to rise up and say, we commend the department for what the department has done.
Right.
It cannot be as if nothing has been done.
Sure, absolutely.
Misinforming the public.
Let me put that to Ms. Madubedube, because there's a wider context of infrastructure in the country. How do you assess where we are in terms of wider questions of school infrastructure?
Okay, I think 2 things. The one is that I just maybe want to say out loud is that one thing that we struggle with, I come from a social movement, and it's learner-led. And the learners that we organize and mobilize around these school infrastructure issues come from schools typically in township and rural communities, quintile 1, 3, maybe 4. And every time we have to confront institutions of power that hold the, not just potential, the constitutional right to provide safety for children whilst they're inside a schooling environment, we come up against these responses around, you have to acknowledge what's been done. The government's done more than enough to run redress around the backlog of inequalities inside of our system. But that isn't enough for 14-year-old Osengutu that is inside a school that has no water security and the paint pit latrine is the only form of sanitation, where when it rains, amanzi come through the roof. And so I'm just feeling a little bit, I just want to restate that there's a problem, fundamental problem, when the institutions of power in our country, people that can in fact do something to make sure that your immediate environment of learning is dignified and safe, tell you that you should wait in line and it's okay that something has happened. I think everyone's lived experience deserves an opportunity to be heard and recognized and moved on effectively and efficiently in real terms. The other thing connected to this that it gets me a little bit upset now is that with rural provinces in particular, and Commissioner Gaum spoke about the fact that the propensity to implement policy is at provincial level, but the Department of Basic Education at the national level holds the responsibility of overseeing all of that progress. Now, at provincial level, the rural provinces in particular are typically returning money back at the end of financial years without the ability to fulfill the commitment of eradicating plain pit latrines and or addressing infrastructure challenges in schools. That's the kind of country we live in. There is a fundamental problem with actually implementing the drawdown. And so we mustn't pretend like it's consequential that we still have schools that have inappropriate infrastructure. Okay, and that has to stay part of this debate or conversation if we're going to be honest. The second thing, just in answer to your question, the broader infrastructure sort of question, it is getting better. And part of the reason I kept reiterating that from the promulgation of this law, infrastructure hasn't always been a priority for the Department of Basic Education across the board, especially at the national level. Civil society had to compel the president first, when Cyril Ramaphosa came into his term, to build us and show us as the country a KPI, so to speak, and set priorities for different heads of departments. And there we made a clear call that said infrastructure must be a priority for the Department of Basic Education. For the longest time, without litigation from civil society, South Africa and the Department of Basic Education wanted to think about the experience of education as only what happens inside of the classroom. Right. And we for a long time said these rights are intrinsic. What happens on your journey to and from school, what you eat inside the school, and the kinds of facilities that you have to make your environment conducive for teaching and learning are part and parcel of the right to basic education. And we've seen that kind of take on, and that's welcomed. And that's how you can start to see the needle move. But we are saying that it's not enough.
Let's go to a break. Mr. Mhlanga, I see you disagree, and we'll, as you said, we have more than enough time to engage. So we'll come back on that after the break. We're talking about basic education and our country's ability or inability to provide the appropriate infrastructure and resources to make those who exist within our schools thrive. Stick with us. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing basic infrastructure in South Africa's schools. Mr. Mhlanga, before we went to the break, there was a suggestion that the department didn't take questions of infrastructure seriously, or at least had to be pressured into prioritizing questions of infrastructure through litigation and other means. You seem to disagree.
No, I disagree. You know, when the Accelerated Infrastructure Delivery Initiative was created, it was the department's own realization that we're not moving as fast as we should to provide appropriate facilities in our schools, and we created that. But it's not just that. Even with the SAFE initiative, we did that because provinces were slow. So the minister felt that it was important to drive the delivery from the center, from DBE itself. But even before that, you had the education infrastructure grant, and you also had the school backlog grant as well. All those funding vehicles were created because we needed several income streams to be able to push the delivery of school infrastructure. So it's always been on the agenda. It's always been a challenge. What civil society has done is to enhance the conversation and put more focus on it. But not that it was never a priority. It was always a priority. We understand that infrastructure is also one of the key building blocks in building a system that works. You cannot expect performance when the infrastructure is not appropriate. So we are moving very fast to make sure that it happens. That's what I'm saying. Things are happening in a new way than it used to happen before. That's why everyone who's in any infrastructure unit, in any department, whether it's DBE or provinces, they're under pressure. They're under pressure because they have to report. There's no day that will be wasted. We need those statistics. We need to make sure that we are tracking delivery on an hourly basis. I'm saying the DGMs that even as I'm speaking to you now, is somewhere in the Eastern Cape, monitoring to make sure that we are delivering at pace so that we're able to meet the deadlines. Not just the deadlines, but it's also part and parcel of improving the system as a whole. So we are committed to it. There's definitely political will to this.
One of the key questions that arises out of this discussion is the legislative framework, and we've got the Bella Bill, the Basic Education Amendment Laws Bill, and this has gone back and forth a number of times. There seems to be consensus on a number of its clauses now, but one of the contentious issues is still this question of parents being potentially criminalized for not sending their children to school, as I understand it. Ms. Madubedube, can I ask you on that, what your particular concerns are around this bill at this stage of its life?
I mean, the first thing is that any government that chooses to criminalize parents, as opposed to finding out, especially if you're sitting inside of the most unequal country in the world, without looking at the kind of socioeconomic conditions that could lead to parents having children out of school. So the choice to criminalize as the first intervention, I think, is very worrying, especially coming from something like a basic education. So we're still concerned about that. What we found in talking to other parents, so what we've done with these laws is that as they come up, we run engagements across school communities in the different provinces that we're active, and we have conversations with parents around what are the conditions that make it such that children aren't in school. And they typically are associated to access and the propensity for people to afford to send children to school. And so parents had advised us in writing back to Parliament and in getting involved in this process that we should try to fight government on at least that bit. And so we're still unsatisfied about that, and we're hoping that the powers that be, even inside Parliament, will see some reason.
And you've welcomed many other aspects of the bill as well.
But can I?
Sure, yeah, by all means.
Talk to the other side of it. So I get what she's saying, but the other side of it is where we encounter situations where people are deliberately organizing protests to prevent learners from going to school. That's also what we want to criminalize, because it cannot be that you are preventing learners from going to school because you have some other issue with the local authorities regarding service delivery. So it's not just about targeting children who are keeping learners at home. That's just one part of it. The other one is where people are deliberately targeting schools, resulting in learners not being able to reach their destination, which is school as expected. So we need to also talk to that part to say, how then do we resolve that?
Sure. Mr. Moroatshehla, as a member of the Portfolio Committee, what's your thought on this contentious aspect of the bill, and on which side of this debate do you fall?
Yeah, before I speak, let me indicate that I believe some of us are not going to be disadvantaged because we are on a virtual platform. You see, the amount of airtime given must be equitable. This is the point I want to register. Chief, you know what is happening. I think first and foremost, South Africans and the public must appreciate the fact that the Bella Bill, as you have just quoted it, is fighting to infuse our grade R, elementary basis of education, into the main school stream, because that's where they're going to get full attention. Now, on the issue of criminalize the parents who may not take their kids to school when they are expected to do so. I don't know what is the fuss around that, because look, education is not a privilege, but it's a right to everyone. And education is a societal matter, meaning everybody who is supposed to play part must play his or her role to make it a point that our children receive that education, quality public education, as the government and the department shall have planned it. So I don't see anything wrong in the department or the state criminalizing those parents who will stop in the way. I think Elijah Mhlanga is correct to say we don't only criminalize the biological parents, but everybody who will stand on the way of the child to acquire quality basic education. It is the responsibility that, listen to what the Constitution says. The Constitution talks about a free and compulsory education. If we talk about the free and compulsory education for all, why should somebody not play his or her part for the child or this poor child to acquire education? Because if we don't do so, we will actually be producing the crop of criminals which are going to trouble us now and some days to come.
Right.
I agree.
And let me bring in our other virtual guest, lest I be accused of unequal treatment further. Advocate Gaum, do you have any thoughts on this, also from your legal perspective, and whether criminalizing this kind of activity could be productive or counterproductive?
Yes, let me just on a lighter note say you should be very careful not to treat the Human Rights Commission unequally.
This is true. I may have a complaint over my head before the end of the show.
At this point, I mean, human rights advocates are most often, very hesitant to criminalize too many things, because it becomes sometimes also even, a bit of a threat to democracy. And maybe the focus here should rather more be on the dropout rate. Why is the dropout rate as high as it is? What are the measures we need to put in place to address that? Because, I mean, we have a situation where only 50% of learners who start grade 1 reaches grade 12, and that is a real problem. It's sort of the elephant in the room of basic education that we're not talking about enough. When it comes to the other point about denying learners access to education facilities, which is very clearly a denial of their right to a basic education, or a violation of that right, no doubt. Protest action, as we all know, has to be peacefully and unarmed, and it cannot be exercised in a manner that impedes other rights. And that is happening too often in our country. Too often, and that should really stop. And I must say, as a commissioner of the Human Rights Commission, I would lean over to saying that I have a lot of sympathy for that. I think that it is absolutely criminal to deny learners the right to basic education in the name of protest action or any other kind of action, violence, and so on and so forth.
And Advocate Gaum, I only now cut you off because we must go to a commercial break, and not for any violation of your fundamental human rights. We'll be back after the break to round off our conversation, some concluding thoughts and the way forward. Stick with us. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing infrastructure in South Africa's basic education landscape. Advocate Gaum, since I haven't started with you yet, can I also just ask you, as we round off our conversation, what do you think the longest levers we can pull are to improve our education infrastructure landscape from your perspective?
Yes, I think there should be a very clear plan. The plan should be publicized. It should be known to all South Africans with very clear timelines. and South Africans should be updated on progress in all respects, because pit latrines is only one aspect thereof. We spoke about the asbestos. I visited the Free State the other day on a provincial visit, and I wasn't even looking for asbestos buildings, and at 2 of the 3 schools I visited, I actually found asbestos buildings. So the point is, the nation should know where they stand with the departments, the provincial departments of education, national department. Should be a plan, clear timelines, and the progress should be published, and details should be published. We shouldn't only hear that 496 schools still have pit latrines. That's all that's left. We want to know which schools are those. That, for example, in the case of the Human Rights Commission, civil society, the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, and other role players, that we can go to the schools where they say there are no pit latrines anymore and see for ourselves whether that is the situation. So that, in short, is the way forward. But we do acknowledge there has been major progress. It's a pity, however, that progress didn't come in the first instance from the provinces, who are the agents of education delivery, but had to come from a national minister whose task that is not in the first instance, with active programs to actually make progress. But in her case, I must say, I do believe she has a political will to make a difference here, and there has been good progress.
Mr. Moroatshehla, what would you say in terms of the future going forward are the most important things that we need to focus on to improve the situation of infrastructure in our schools even further?
Thank you very much. Let me indicate that indeed we are on the right track. And being on the right track, it doesn't necessarily mean that we do not have challenges. I think with regard to the number of observable challenges, of course, if I were to put it, but because of time, let me just indicate that the issue of learner-teacher ratio remains, Mhlanga remains a thorny issue in the delivery of education or to our beloved children. Because once there is that imbalance, education is the sufferer at the end of the day. The song, Mhlanga, which keeps on saying there is insufficient funds to close the infrastructure backlog, it's a concern for the portfolio committee, and it's equally a concern for the general public, as some of the colleagues are echoing it. But however, as a wrap-up, given this airtime, let me indicate that we should pride ourselves in as far as delivery of the education system in South Africa is concerned. We have got more than 9.6 million vulnerable children who are the beneficiaries of the NSNP, National School Nutrition Program. And it's something we should also be able to identify and say it's a plus. It was not there yesterday, it is here today as I'm talking to you. We have got a number of no-fee schools identified. You can go and Google and check those schools which are falling under no-fee schools.
Right.
We have got them. You see, your problem. You stop me when I talk about the strong points.
No, not at all.
You are a student of a black spot analysis.
Not at all.
You see?
Not at all.
Yeah.
So I do apologize, but I must bring in. My only hope is to bring in.
Let me respect you, otherwise you are not going to invite me.
No, I assure you. I assure you, the invitation is always open. So, yeah. But because we only have 2 minutes left, could I ask the remainder of our panelists just to give their final thoughts?
Okay. On the short term, the National Treasury has announced quite radical budget cuts to all social sort of departments, the basic education being one of them. We would like people watching, civil society, government and business to join us in some kind of response to protect the rights of basic education for those most marginalized. So we have to do something against austerity in the short term. In the medium term, I think we want to also continue to engage Parliament in the Commission, for example. The Department of Basic Education in the last financial year had fruitless and wasteful expenditure of 2.4 billion rand. And so we need things done in the immediate, despite budget cuts, and we need to be monitoring when and how those things are done. The money of South Africans must be used to make sure that we do have equal and quality education. In the long term, the law for school infrastructure is being amended at the moment, and we're looking for support from South Africans. Join the public debate, watch it go through Parliament and engage it, because we are pushing back those deadlines again, and it just can't happen.
Mr. Mhlanga.
I just wanted to say that in our effort at delivering infrastructure, we have a new factor now that we need to consider, which is the business forums who are stopping our projects, delaying delivery. That's the first thing. The second thing is the floods. Climate change is a real situation that we're facing. Western Cape suffered damage to schools last week. KZN last year and the year before that, and 2 years before that. All of those things are taking us back when we want to go forward. So those are some of the challenges that we are facing, because you have to fix schools that were in a good condition, even though you need to also attend to those that were already in a bad situation. So we take 2 steps back, and 2 steps forward and 2 back because of natural phenomena. But those are some of the things that we also need to consider as we have this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists this evening for a fascinating and insightful discussion and debate on this crucial and important question. Let's continue the conversation at Unfiltered SABC on various social media platforms. Tonight, we have explored and discussed whether South Africa's basic school infrastructure is adequate, and why the failures that have been made, and what successes should be celebrated. We look forward to another conversation of Unfiltered News, Unfiltered Views, and Unfiltered Conversations after this. Have a good evening.